normally have a fancy intro video, but I realized it's the wrong one, so I don't want to introduce the wrong person.
It's
Good
all right.
morning. So this is the final Ask Me Anything for Founders Pack 2023. I can't believe the year is over. It's kind of crazy.
It's
Our,
crazy.
yeah, it's pretty crazy. Our guest is Juan Chaves, I always say your name wrong. It's
Chavez,
Chaves.
Juan Chavez. Yeah.
It is. Okay, right. I
Yeah.
mess up everybody's name. It's brutal.
No problem.
Um, so Juan's background, first of all, he's the principal behind Elevate Concepts, and his background is most recently, I think, as a VP of sales for SAP and a long
Yeah.
history in large account selling. And so, first of all, thanks for joining us today.
Man, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and just share some knowledge and talk to you a little bit.
So the title of this was, create your first sales process or start your first sales team. So I guess maybe we'll just start with like, how did you get started in sales, and then where did that lead to?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. My sales career goes back a long way, right? I'm gonna age myself, but I've been doing sales over 25 years now. I ended up getting into sales almost by accident, right? So I have a degree in finance, and initially I went into banking, and realized pretty quickly that like sitting behind a desk just running spreadsheets all day was not going to be for me. I wanted something where I was able to interact with customers more, just really, pretty people oriented, and found my way into, the mortgage banking, kind of try to, figure out a way how to use my banking background and to leverage that into the sales world. So I got into mortgage banking, and I did that for, God, man, over 12 years. Ended up owning my own business, and expanded my company. I built a business out of that, expanding my company to add like mortgage side and the real estate side. So I actually sold some real estate as well. Ended up being a broker, and unfortunately 2008 happened, and the world of that industry collapsed. And so I really stayed in it for some time, really trying to build it, keep going, growing the business. But I remember one day my wife looked at me and was like, Juan, you're gonna have a heart attack. Like, you're gonna die. Like, you're just the
It's working
forces
too
in that
much.
industry were so rough that I was like, yeah, you're probably right. This is pretty challenging. So, I mean, I knew I could sell. I mean, it was one of those things where like I'm pretty passionate about it. I knew I could do that. And she was like, well, she had transitioned into technology. So she had moved over to technology sales and said, hey, why don't you look at this yourself? And that's how I ended up working, for SAP. Yeah.
And so, well, obviously, the finance background at SAP is big in kind of the ERP space. Uh, what sort of, so you're obviously selling technology.
Yeah.
What sort of training did you have when you started in sales, and
Well,
was that good, or how did you learn the skills
yeah,
of
no, great
sales?
question, right? And one of the things, so here's something that I found interesting, right? So obviously, when I built my previous business, I actually spent a lot of time building a B2B side of it, right? I went after a lot of the larger builder accounts, like the Beazer, Ryan, and KB Homes, all those guys, and built a direct, pipeline with them where I was getting a lot of their mortgage overflow that they couldn't work. So I was used to that sales cycle on top of dealing with the consumer directly. That helped me really, leverage those skills moving over to technology, because it was one of those questions that I was like, what's a mortgage guy, like how are we going to hire that guy, like can he really sell technology? And I use that as a way for me to say, well, it's about understanding the problem that we're trying to solve. And so they gave me a shot, right? I was able to get in the door. Quickly realized though that technology, complex sales is very different from what I was used to doing. So I seeked out a mentor pretty quickly, and I'll name him. I'll call him out right here. Steve Tate, who at the time was my VP. He really showed me the way of how to sell SAP, how to sell into a complex sales environment. And SAP provided some great tools as well. The company provided some good training, but that one-on-one mentorship really helped. And throughout my career at the company, and as I moved over to the Concur side of the house, I always seeked out leaders that were exceptional at what they did. I wanted to learn from them, and I think that's something that really made a difference in my sort of sales growth. Sort of finding somebody who's paved that road, somebody who can, shorten that learning curve, because I think that's a big challenge, right? If you're an AE who struggles at certain things, just like everyone who's had a sales job, you have some good bosses, you have some, not so good bosses that don't maybe spend as much time trying to develop you. And so for me, trying to find that outside person that could actually guide me and take the time. And there's things that you don't want to share with your boss. You don't want to expose yourself either. So really finding that person made a difference. When I'll give a shout out. When I was at Concur, there was a wonderful lady. Her name is Anne Christelle Graham, and she's actually a CRO now at a different organization. And she really helped me hone in just the overall complex sales cycle, and a lot of things that I learned from her and Steve. I take on. I took on through my career, selling, there for many, many years. And I teach those now in my organization.
That's awesome. All right. So, I think the one group of people that you obviously work with are people that are existing account executives or salespeople. And then the other group that we do a lot with obviously are founders. And I guess in your opinion, like, if someone's starting out from scratch, who in the organization needs to sell?
Well, look, if you truly are starting from scratch, right? If you're a founder, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like those guys are doing a lot of the initial sales, and they're going out there. They know their product. They know what they're trying to do. So, and you see that a lot in early stages of a startup, where they're the ones sort of carrying that torch of having those executive meetings, presenting their product, really understanding, what they do, and bringing it to the customer side. So usually founders do a pretty good job of that piece, because they just know what they put together and what they're selling, and they're passionate about. So they have some success there. I think the challenges come when when now you take that and you're trying to grow a sales organization, and you're bringing in folks to try to sell for you, and they don't usually have the established infrastructure on how to grow and train a sales team to successfully sell their product. That's where a lot of pain happens.
That makes sense. All right. So, if someone's starting from scratch and they're coming up with kind of like figuring out their first sales process, what are kind of the big steps in that process? Like, how do you determine that?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I'll tell you is that when it comes to a complex sales environment, it's identifying the sales team, or identifying that your reps are really adept at three things that, in my opinion, make enterprise or SaaS or complex salespeople really successful, right? And are they adept at like really understanding how to build demand, like how to build a pipeline? And it's not just like, let me cold call till I'm blue in the face and I bug the hell out of 1,000 executives. It's more about is the team capable of taking the territory that the company has provided them and dissect that to build a territory plan that now creates a demand strategy around that territory, where there's named accounts or net new deals that they're going after. And then once you've identified those accounts that you're going after, can you then build an account strategy, an account plan of how you're going to get revenue out of those specific accounts or prospects? So you have to be really good at doing that, and doing it consistently. Where a lot of reps and sales organizations fail or have challenges is that, they'll sort of start, spending a lot of time building that demand. But then once they build a pipeline, they kind of take their foot off the gas, because now they got to go execute and close those deals. So that's how you have those peaks of like growth in pipeline, and then it falls off as you close it and you do that. So excellence comes when you consistently do that all the time. You're always in that demand generation mode, where you're finding opportunities, you're looking at your territory, you're looking at your accounts, so that you have pipeline consistently. So that's the one pillar that I look at, that reps who do really well always do. The other pillar that reps are really good at, that excel, are around deal execution. Once you are able to build that demand, right now you got to go close those deals, right? And there's a process that you have to follow to actually succeed. There's a process around the discovery. Are you properly running that discovery, in a way that you're uncovering all the pain the customer has? And then once you've established that, and you actually have a commitment from the customer to engage, that they actually have a project, then are you running the deal in a way that you're presenting properly? Are you not rushing to deliver pricing? Are you delivering at the right time? Do you have the proper engagement from the customer, for the stakeholders? And once you go through those phases, sort of like that mid funnel of the cycle, and you get to that closing stage, are you aligned to close at the agreed timeline that you have with your customer? Are you properly set up with legal and procurement to get the deal through the finish line? So that's sort of that second pillar we talked about of building the team. And that the third pillar, though, that I always noticed is reps who are really good at running their deals, demand generation. They also are very skillful, or have like this, what I call like winning best practices, winning mindset, winning behaviors. Like they know how to manage time well. They're organized. They know how to forecast. They know how to deal with internal, challenges, and sometimes selling externally, you're doing as much effort or more selling internally to get a deal approved. So they do all those things very well. So when you combine all of those sort of skills, then now you have a sales team that's well enabled and able to go out there and execute on the go-to-market strategy.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we have these three pillars, right?
Yeah.
The first one you were talking about was demand generation and a territory plan. So what does a territory plan usually look like?
I mean, territory plan is comprehensive, right? It's when you think about an account executive, and let's just take, for example, somebody who's regionally based, and they say, look, you're going to manage California and you're in the high tech vertical. So understanding, where are my customers? What does my customer profile look like? And segmenting that territory into buckets so that you can identify your targets at a high level. That's really what a territory plan is.
Okay, so it's saying like whether it's in the case of again, let's say I'm starting, well, like us, we've built ops, right?
Yeah.
So we have prospect data sets that we sell, but we also have prospect data sets like, hey, we think our customer looks like X, right? It's like lead generation agencies, founder-led businesses that are technology, whether it's SaaS or AI startups. There's a segment that's e-commerce. So it's like you're saying have a plan for each of those segments.
Yeah, you basically, in your territory plan, what you're doing is you're taking those segments and identifying those as areas where you're going to focus your efforts, right? So now, let's say you're covering, the LA area, you would identify like, okay, where are my accounts? And now you're going to take that territory plan into what are my top 20? And, it depends on your product. Like maybe your metrics are based on, employee size or employee count or revenue size. Or maybe, you have a different metric that you consider important for your specific profile. So you would identify your customers based on those key elements.
And then the second part to that first pillar is around demand generation. So like what exactly does that mean? Like what sort of activity or what sort of effort?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So think about this, right? So now that you've had a chance to dissect your territory and you said, okay, I'm going to be going after, let's look at Ops.io. I'm going to be going after founders and, that have a company profile where they're doing $100 million and they have 1,000 employees. Okay, so that's sort of like the broad picture up here. Now your demand generation plan is putting together like things that you can actually execute on. Are you going to be hosting, weekly webinars that you're going to, drive them to go see so they become aware of your product? And then if that is your strategy, you're going to, create sort of what that sequence of those webinars look like. Are we going to hold one a quarter with the goal of, getting 100 people per webinar so that your sales team can then follow up on it? That, the goal is to get engagement, right? That's one approach. Maybe you're more, face-to-face where you're actually holding events, that you're going to conferences and holding those events. And typically a demand generation strategy, it's like a combination of all these different things. Maybe there's some cold outreach that you have your BDR team doing. So you have a pillar where it's like, okay, my BDR is going to be doing awareness campaigns to get people just to raise their hand. where now the sales reps can execute and follow up on those to create meetings to go on, understand whether there's a match there for us to work with.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, and obviously we're focused on cold outreach, but we do more than that just to even sell that product. So
Yeah. So
totally
that
get it. It's like
strategy,
events and
it's really that, right? Like as an account executive, what you're looking at, what your demand generation strategy is what are all the different events and things that you're doing to get somebody to raise their hand to have a conversation about whether there's an opportunity there, right? So like I said, there's webinars that people do, there's events that people do, there's lunch and learns that folks, sales reps hold. They attend conferences. They will do cold outreach or referrals. They're going to work their LinkedIn network. These are all the sort of the things that you're doing. You're going to work with your partners. And, in instances, where I used to work, there was a lot of partners we worked with that had access to certain accounts. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to create a strategy where I'm working with these 10 partners to get access into the accounts they're in, and now you don't have such a cold outreach. You're being introduced.
that makes total sense. All right, so I always have this acronym in my head, and I don't know if you have something similar, which is BANT. So I don't know if you have something similar to that, but for people like, do you use BANT, or do you have your own version of that? Like,
yeah, I mean, like there's BANT, there's MEDIC, right? There's a lot of different things. And at the end of the day,
for people that don't know, like, what are those?
Yeah, it's ways that you're trying to qualify whether a customer has budget, what their timeline is. You're basically trying to understand all the different elements of the deal, right? Do you have the budget? Do you have it? Executive engagement. What's the timeline look like? The things that are very critical to understand. Is there a project at hand that someone wants to address?
Cool. Okay. So then the idea there being that, is this really a deal or an opportunity or not?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So then that comes it sounds like that goes then to your second pillar, which is managing the actual deal. So
yeah. I was going to say
your
that comes more into, so if you kind of walk through the life cycle of an opportunity, right? So you're a rep, you've gone out there, you spent time doing demand generation. Somebody raises their hand saying, hey, I want to learn more about what you're saying. Well, we have that problem at our company. I'd like to learn more how you guys can help us solve that. So now you're going into that sort of qualified mode, right? You schedule some discovery with them. Typically, I used to like to hold my discovery workshops where you're asking the customer to bring multiple stakeholders, and you're just going through elements of understanding what's going on in their business, what's going on in their industry. Let me understand more about the pain point. Is this something that you've tried to solve in the past? And if it's not, why not? What happens if if the customer decides not to do something? If, you're trying to really understand, is the pain big enough that they have to take action? If the answers to a lot of those questions is they've tried to solve it in the past and they've punted, you want to kind of dig into why. Like, why was it not important enough to solve it? Do you want to understand about do you have executive sponsorship so that when it comes time to sign the contract and cut the check, like somebody's on board, right? A lot of deals die when there's sort of that mid-level person in the company who recognizes pain or recognizes there's an issue, and they kind of take it upon themselves to go out and like, oh, let me find a provider, somebody that can help us with this, right? And a lot of reps, they get happy ears because they're like, hey, look, I'm talking to the so-and-so mid-level manager over here at this company that they want to talk about and see your product, and we're going to have a demo. But the rep hasn't really gone in and asked the questions around, is this an initiative that the executive team is willing to get behind to solve, right? And if there is, great, do they have a timeline set for this? Have they really thought about when they want to have this solution in place so we can help you sort of back into that? And when they can't answer those questions, right, then the deal gets shaky because a lot of reps don't ask that. They get into the deal, they do a demo. The middle manager is like happy because they're like, man, I'm seeing a demo. Then they go pitch it to an executive, and the deal dies because the executive is like, no, we don't have budget for this right now, or that's not even on the roadmap.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I mean, obviously this, there's different scales to this, whether it's like a large complex deal versus something that's simpler. But I think in all cases, it's like what you're saying is make sure they have the authority to do a deal in the first place. Like, don't pitch the wrong person.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
make sure there's
That's a big thing, right? It's making sure that you have that broader picture. And even, look, it works at the smaller deals, in the larger deals, where the larger deal, there's just a bigger bus of people involved. That's really what it is. It's, now, and there's more visibility. You have C-level folks that are engaged throughout the process. Sometimes there's outside consultants that are coming in and, taking part of that evaluation. So it's just more things to orchestrate, but you still have to have that consensus of, like, somebody who has to have authority to sign off on this. It's on board. They have to have the money to spend. You have to, as part of the discovery process, you want to understand, like, what the organization's sort of buying process is, because deals die when you think it's something that can move quickly, but it really is a process that takes a lot longer, and so it gets delayed.
Makes total sense. All right. So then, that's kind of like your approach to qualifying. And it sounds like that then goes into like the you've gone past demand generation, you've qualified something. What are kind of the keys to go between that and a closed deal?
Yeah. So it's funny because I think I did a post on LinkedIn about this here. So once somebody has gone through the qualification process, right? A customer, shares with you their pain points, shares you everything that they want to solve, and you agree to the fact that I'm like, hey, look, we can help you with this, right? Normally, a customer goes, great, I like to see a demo and pricing, right? That's typically what customers want next. I always like to tell reps to say, that's great, you're going to get there, but let's slow it down a little bit. Let's really create what I like to call sort of a mutual engagement plan with the customer, to say, okay, let's say it's you. All right, Mike, let's, now that we had a chance to sort of understand your situation, based on what you share with me, you want to have something up and running in Q2 of next year, 24. Here's what that looks like from a, let's get you there perspective. It means, like, we're going to be doing demos over the next, 30 days. There's a gathering phase where we're going to look at requirements so that our team can actually do that properly for you. So that's something that, you as an AE have to make sure that you actually prepare your solutions consultants properly to address. So there's all these stages, right? And that's what that engagement plan outlines, right? Like, okay, we're going to be doing demo, but at the same time, we're going to be preparing a proposal to share with you. And based on what you share with me, your procurement process takes, 90 days. So we're going to be sharing with you some templated contracts at this stage, so that your procurement and legal team can start that review process as we continue through sort of that validation stages of solution validation that you're wanting to see from the demo side, right? And what you want to do is you want to get the customer to, once again, validate those stages, agree to them, and then now having that engagement plan, then you move forward through those milestones in the deal cycle. The beauty of it is that, look, rarely do they all go well, right? Rarely. I mean, there's always delays. Somebody gets sick or something happens, but it allows you to come back and say, hey, we were shooting for this date. Sounds like, Sue over there in X department can't make it. Is it, now we need to reschedule it. That's going to move our timeline this much, and if the customer is engaged and willing, you're gauging that commitment to getting this completed, right? It's when things start to go off the rails and they're not, like, eager to get it back on, or reschedule the meeting, or bring the, if you schedule a presentation, and for say there's 5 executives that need to be present and only one comes, and the other 4 don't show up and they never want to be part of the process, it's a red flag, right? So as a leader and your AE, you're asking all these questions like, hey, we were supposed to have finance and accounting and HR part of this process, but the only person that showed up was the procurement guy. Like, what's going on? All right. So that engagement plan allows you to sort of have, checks and balances through the process. And it allows you to, go back to the customer and say, hey, Mr. Customer, we understood that this was something that was an initiative that was very important for the company, but I'm not seeing that engagement. It has something changed, has a priority changed, and see where that takes you.
That makes sense. Yeah. And again, we're dealing with all these like layers. So, I always had this idea, like, we're talking about complex sales, usually larger ticket deals, right? Because obviously this approach is long and it gets expensive the longer they're working on it, right?
Yeah.
So there's payoffs got to be big. What, in your experience, are some of the things to be aware of as far as like figuring out the level and what people care about? Like, do you have any methodology there that you kind of share with people?
What do you mean figuring out the level? I don't
Well, I
understand.
always had this idea of C level, V level, and D level, and they all had different priorities in the organization. So I didn't necessarily like focus on the same thing for each of them. I'm curious if you have anything similar to that, or
Yeah, no, absolutely right, and it has. It depends, right? Like, look, a $50,000 deal is not going to have the same level of scrutiny or executive engagement as a $5 million project at a company,
right,
depending on the company size. So you kind of have to get an understanding of what your customer's profile is and what sort of that level of effort is being put into this project, right? If you're talking millions of dollars, that's going to require way different levels of approvals than a couple $100,000 project. So, but these are questions you ask, right? Like as you're working through that discovery, say, hey, based on what we share with you so far, Mr. Customer, the range of this project could be 150K. What does that look like from your side to get something like this approved? Can you walk me through that? Who has to sign off on this? And then you just let them tell you what that looks like. So then you can, validate all the people that need to be involved. In many instances, if the solutions are smaller, maybe the level of approvals is at a SVP, right? You don't have to go to a CFO, you don't have to go to a CEO. So then, if that's what the customer's telling you, you take notes of that, and that's who you want to engage so that they can sign off on it, but validate that, right? Like they say, oh, the SVP has to do that. When you're talking to the procurement folks, validate that. Like, hey, my understanding is that this is what that procurement process looks like from you guys, and the ultimate decision maker is Steve, the SVP. Oh yeah, that's true. Okay, great. Now you have validation. I can notate that, right? Sometimes you'll catch the customer in a lie. They'll be like, no, Steve only sends it up to the CFO for sign off. So you're just trying to understand and validate all the time, like, hey, is the information I'm getting from the customer one correct? And to what level do I need to take this to get approvals?
cool. Okay, great. So is there anything else kind of in that middle part as far as like managing
Yeah,
deals
I
that you
think
think is
there's
important to?
in the middle part, and again, I'm just giving you sort of high level touch points of
Yeah,
what's going on, but areas where reps sometimes fail or they rush to the demo, right? And I think a demo is one of those areas where really preparing for that demo, it's important, because most reps want to go there and they treat it as a, let me show you our features and functionality, and not in a way that it should be treated, which is, let's show you the value that our solution brings to your organization, and how we're going to help you address your business concern, business problem, right? So preparing for that demo with that mindset of, we're going to go in here, and having that opening slide or the opening piece of the demo where you're really saying, hey, we're here to address these issues that we understand is the company's problems, get validation. Is there anything else that we've missed? And, then getting into the functionality of how the solution addresses those, not like, we got a green button that you can click and et cetera, right? So when reps really kind of take that mindset of looking at the demo in a way that allows you to validate your sort of functionality towards addressing their business problems, things change, right? And then continuing to align on those next steps as you finish that out, making sure that it's not just like, great, we showed you the demo, I'll call you in a couple of weeks to see, to get some feedback, but more of having that discussion at the on every presentation you do, you're sort of setting up the next touch point in mind, not like, I'll get back with you on that. It's more like, hey, now we've had a chance to share with you the demo. Based on our conversations, you guys want to see some pricing proposal. What I like to recommend is that we get together 2 weeks from now. Yes, does that work? Perfect. You're sort of getting commitment as you
yeah,
go into the process versus leaving it up to chance.
yeah. That makes total sense. I always drove me nuts if you walk away without a follow up call or a follow up direction. And it's like, wait, what are we specifically doing here?
Yeah. You want to secure, take, one of the things that I always used to coach my reps is like, take control of the process. Don't let the customer take control of it for you. And I mean, with flexibility, right? Like if you're saying, hey, we want to touch base in 2 weeks. Great. Let's get that scheduled. I know things can change, but let's get it on the calendar so that, I can align resources for you. This way, we're not waiting until the last minute where I can't actually provide the resource you need.
Makes total sense. All right. So we've talked about like qualification. We've talked about, doing discovery to figure out client needs. We talked about then kind of the demo or presentation. Is there anything else that to get between that and a closed deal typically that people kind of
Yeah.
struggle with?
Yeah, so so you go through demo, right? And then typically from demos, customers are like, hey, I'd like to get some pricing. So you put in together now a proposal, right? And from one of the things that I always tell reps is when you present your pricing a proposal, one, if you can, if you're always do it in person and or virtually, not just like I'm gonna email you pricing. Uh,
Never works.
because one, you're leaving it up to chance that they're going to interpret, whatever you're sending them. Number two is whatever presentation you're doing, it has to be very clear. Uh, I hate it just sending, pricing on an email. Like I always like to do it in some kind of document where like, that's going to get forwarded on, right? So think about whenever you're presenting pricing, whoever's seeing that on the other end, it could be their first time they're seeing your solution. And if all they're seeing is a number, it's always like, why are we buying this? So I always like to have every pricing proposal that gets presented, and it's in the format where it's like, here's what we were brought on to address these issues. This is how our solution addresses those issues, and then here's how our pricing looks like for that, right? So you're always having that story of like, you have this problem, here's how we solve your problem, and here's our pricing, and again, doing it in person or virtually, but in a way where you're presenting. So what you also want to do is ask the champion you're working with, hey, who else are you going to present this to? Oh, I gotta go send this to the CFO. Great. I would always.
Why aren't they here?
Like, hey, in many instances, if the deal is large enough, you present it to the CFO. But there are instances where
it depends on the size,
in the mid market or smaller deals where they're going to take that and present it themselves. Then you would say, hey, I'd love to be able to, either present with you, or if they don't do that opportunity, let me coach you. Let me walk you through how to present our solution so that you're actually, doing it in a way and walk them through the objections. So now
I'm so glad you said that, because I think that is like something I've always observed where it's like, don't send them pricing. Don't send a proposal. That's the worst thing you can do. Like, you're not really helping them, and it's gonna eventually fail, right? Unless it's a smaller budget item where they've agreed to it, they're gonna put it on a credit. You're just not investing that time. But I think that's such a silly thing that people
complex environment or a deal of any size, proposals need to be presented so that like you give opportunity, one, to read the room and the feedback that how was it received? Were they were they interested in what questions does the customer have? Like inevitably there's questions, right? They want to understand more about the metrics that the solution is based on. They want to understand more about so many things like the length of contract. There's so many questions that come up that if you just like threw it over the fence, you're just asking for failure.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. I'm glad you said that. All right, then any other areas that you think are important for either founders or reps to?
So, as we get now through the finish line, right? So like we've sent proposals, we sent pricing. Now you got to get into that. The customer says, this is great. We want to work with you, or they start the negotiation phase, right? As you're negotiating the deal, don't lose sight of a couple of very critical components. One is, have you had your, the IT vet the solution so that it doesn't get hung up right before you go to sign, where it's a security check from the IT team, where there's an integration question or something that could derail the deal. So always, and the earlier on in the process that you're making sure that your team is working with their IT team to vet the integration piece and security concerns, the better. So many deals get derailed when that's not asked on early on. You get to the finish line, somebody raises their hand from IT, goes, well, we haven't looked at the security piece of this, or we haven't looked at the integration piece. Now, all of a sudden, that's going to take 3 more months to get that addressed. So always address that early on so that those boxes can be verified, checked in as the process. Number 2 is legal review, right? If they have internal or external counsel, we know that lawyers are going to spend their time and they're going to they're going to justify their existence. They're not just going to glance over a contract and say yeah. So they're going to redline it. Depending on the size of the deal, if it's small enough, your company might say, hey, we don't take redline. This is our contract. Right. But at least you having the opportunity to walk the customer through any questions. If your company, it is a boilerplate template, if it's a small solution, the answer will be like, look, we don't really redline because, if it's a SaaS model, we can't, take this to market where every contract we have is customized. It's not something that the system can support. But I'm happy to walk you through questions so that your legal team understands why it is the way it is. You'd be surprised how many questions are really more of a business matter than a true legal matter. So making sure you're knocking off those IT and legal pieces, so that like you have a clear path to close. And then from there you're just negotiating on the terms of the deal. Now you actually agree on when a deal can get signed.
I love it. All right, so we've gone from qualification to discovery to presentation. We've gone to negotiation. Now we're getting down to close. Is there any kind of like sage advice you have for people around closing out a
Yeah,
deal?
look, this is the perfect time of year to talk about that, because this happens all the effing time. Sorry, pardon my French. So you have a rep that has a deal and they forget to ask, like, hey, is the signer going to be around in the holidays to get this executed? Or is the signer going to be around at the end of the quarter? Because so many deals like, oh yeah, well, Mike is the CEO of the company and he's the one who finally signs it all. He's just there to, sign the deal once we send it up to him. Perfect, great. No one asks, is Mike around? Deal gets to Mike. Well, it's December, 20th, and he Mike takes the last 15 days of the year off every year. So unfortunately, he's out skiing. So we're gonna have to do this in January 5th when he's back in the office. Yeah. And all the work you just did got screwed because you didn't ask the question like, hey, is there any planned company events or any planned vacations or planned outings where somebody's going to be out of the office? That's a critical component. I mean, those are things that happen a lot. And it's like somebody who missed asking a question.
Makes total sense. And I guess one way you could frame it sometimes is like, well, when do you expect us to start on this or deliver it, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, the question you ask at the beginning is like, hey,
you got to get that other step.
Yeah, when do you want to go live, right? So you work everything back from like your go live date, and you arrive at in order, let's say, implementation takes 12 weeks. Well, in order for you to be live in 12 weeks, we have to have a signature by, call it December 10th, right?
Yep.
So when you arrive at that date that you have in mind as like your target close date, that's when you ask like, hey, I just want to make sure that want to understand that there's no unforeseen mishaps, right? The people that are going to execute this, is legal going to be available to get this done? Is the procurement team going to be around to get this done? And it's always think about it like, if you're a quarterly driven business, because people go on vacation, right? Is there any scheduled vacation plans? And then if you don't ask those questions and it's a critical person, they could delay your deal. And if they aren't, let's say, oh yeah, what, Mike's going to be gone, from the 15th of December to the 31st. Okay, great. So who's, his proxy, who's going to step in to make sure that we get this executed? So that, you have a clear path to get that done.
I love it. All right. So now you talked about the third pillar a little bit, and I want to be conscious of everybody's time. So you're talking about kind of like being really well organized and kind of habits, it sounded like. What do you mean by that, and what does that look like to you?
So I'll absolutely, and I'll share with you a little bit on that. So, having managed reps and working with folks for many years, you see patterns, right? And I always find it interesting that, I talk about these three pillars, and excellence is when you spend, 80% of your time in the two things like demand generation and deal execution, and 20% of your time on the other stuff, right? Like admin things, right? Like, oh, I got to update CRM and do the admin things. So I got to take this training over here, et cetera. But when you talk to a rep and, maybe they're struggling, maybe their pipeline isn't as good, or their deals aren't flowing as well, and you're like, well, what's going on? They're like, man, I'm just so busy. I don't have time for this. Well, let's really break down what your time looks like. And it's not well managed, right? It's like they're doing BS stuff. They're just wasting time, not really allocating it where it needs to be. So I talk about best practices and like just winning behaviors. When you really work with somebody to say, your time is not being allocated properly, here are the things that we need to change. Organizational things like, if you have stuff to do that's like the company requires, CRM updates, there's all kinds of admin stuff we have to do as part of our jobs, but do them in a way where it's not impeding you to do the things that you need to do to drive deals forward. Don't do that at like 2 in the afternoon when you could do that, use that time to be on the phone with customers. But you'd be surprised how many reps just, don't take the time to really work on those behaviors that are like the winning behaviors. Like I just talked about organization, how do you manage your time? Mindset's a big one, man. Like in sales is a grinding job, right? Like you got to be able to go in, get your butt kicked, customer tells you no, deal falls off. I mean, every deal dies like 5 times before it closes. It's this emotional roller coaster. So if you don't really work on that, like clearing your mind, your mindset, so that like you can get up every time you lose a deal, then it's tough. So I really work with the reps and my teams and the students that I work with, my folks that I coach, and aligning those sort of winning behaviors so they have that foundation of how to grow from there.
I love it. That's really helpful. All right. So what does it look like when, someone's like either figuring out their first sales process or they want to put more structure around it, they're starting out and they're on a team or they're a rep, like what does it look like for them to, start with you, and what does that process look like? Like, what do you?
Yeah. So, like I share with you, right? I believe in those 3 things, those key pillars, right? And then I built a program that aligns my teachings and the structure that I bring into organizations to really hone in all those different skills. And I do an assessment. I take every sales rep through an assessment to ensure where the strengths are and where their weaknesses are. And I ask them too, like, what do you think you need help? So we align on those pieces. Then we work through, are they understanding and capable of building our territory, doing account planning and doing demand generation strategy. So we make sure that they understand that. I walk them through like account planning. Account planning is critical, right, for them to really identify where they're going to get deals from the accounts that they're working with. I take them through the structures of like call planning. I'll talk a little bit about call planning because it's one of those things that it's a behavior that is so critical for success, but a lot of reps don't do it well. Your typical average account executive will have a call with an executive, right? And literally they'll spend like 5 minutes before the call, like briefly glancing through LinkedIn or like looking at the company and so they just have enough to talk about. That's what a lot of reps do. Where I like to change the behavior to say, when you actually have customer engagements, like that planning of those calls is so critical to the success of the deal. Actually, instead of just rushing through that, spend, an hour or 30 minutes the day before, really sort of structuring what that call is going to look like. Hey, I want to talk to Mike and I want to make sure that like, here's the plan or the goal of the call. Here are the things that we want to get out of. Here are the topics we want to bring up. Here are the topics we don't want to bring up. And here's what we want to walk out of this call with. And when you document all that and you can share with your solution consultant, if you have to bring an executive to the call, you can actually share that document with them. Everybody's on the same page. And you're also walked through the objections that the customer can bring up on those calls so that you're prepared. The big thing is, when you are prepared and you're confident on those calls, customers see that, right? They understand like, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. Like, and they want to buy from people that are, confident. And then we also so that's on the call planning side, right? And then I spend a lot of time on deal execution on my trainings because that is one area where you can see the massive growth in just close rates, reps feeling confident on their, running their deals. So probably half my program is on deal execution. And then I kind of close it out with, hey, now that you've done all these things from like demand gen, the account planning side to, run the deal, are you, proficient at forecasting? Like now that like the leaders want to understand like, hey, does this rep really know how to forecast their business? Do they know how to, work through internal processes to get deals approved? There is a great way of preparing a deal for Deals Desk to actually get it approved, and there's a bad way. I teach you how to do it right, so your deal gets approved the first time. It doesn't have to go back to Deals Desk, 10 times and delays your closing.
Yeah. So kind of to your point, if you're selling inside of a large organization, there's a whole department to say no and yes to deals because there's obviously financial impact to them. Obviously,
Yes,
founder-led
absolutely.
startups are a little different, but all right.
And even startups, like as you're getting through, like there's a way to go and present the deal right to the CEO and say, hey, look, I went and met with this customer. here are the things, here's why we should do a deal, here's the risks that we have of saying no, or here's who our competition is, here's who we're going up against. So, presenting that in a way where everybody has the information they need to make a decision.
I love it. All right. Well, you've given us a really good overview of kind of what a successful rep or a team looks like. Is there anything we didn't touch on you think is really important?
No, I mean, I think we have an overview, right? I think it's, every organization is going to have their own process, and it's really understanding like what does that look like, and enabling reps to do, having the tools that they need so they can go and execute, right? So, for me, why I, started this business is because when I became a leader, I found that like not everybody's on the same playing field, right? And the quickest way to success is giving the reps the ability to, execute evenly across what you need them to do to win. And when you enable the teams from either at the onset they're hired, maybe they're an outside hire, you onboard them properly, that time to revenue gets shortened, significantly. So you want to spend the time and the resources as a company to bring in, whether it's myself, somebody with a lot of experience, or someone else, like, do that, because it really makes a difference on your sales ability to, hit the ground running and actually close deals quicker, right? Think about if a rep takes 1 quarter versus 2, how much of an impact is that to the company versus, the cost of or the investment of, a sales enablement organization.
I love it. All right. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you, and who do you want to talk to?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a great way. You can reach me on LinkedIn. You can reach me on my website at joinelevateconcepts.com. But I'm, through my social, LinkedIn profile, Juan Chaves, and I think we can put that on the chat here.
I'm gonna post it. Actually, I'll just put it in the chat, and that way it'll appear on. Well, it's definitely on YouTube. I'll make sure it's on LinkedIn too and Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you kind of sharing with us kind of how you approach these things and kind of some of the key factors in people building out their first sales process and teams.
If someone wants to reach me, they can also email me or call me, right? You can reach me at juan@joinelevateconcepts.com, or give me a ring, 949-212-1915.
Oh, geez, we got a phone number even. That's awesome.
That's
right. People still use those, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm old school, man.
Yeah, there you go. Call me, man. Geez. It's actually, I'm curious about that. Like, so we use like a lot of cold outreach. There's a lot of like, maybe this is diving back in, but especially in technology and software as a service in particular, there's this idea of product-led growth versus, using sales processes. You're trying to avoid complex sales process, but obviously the bigger the deal, the harder it is not to do that. And it's tough to just think people are going to show up on your site and sign up, which sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. So I think, like in your case, like what's your opinion on, just from a demand generation point of view, say cold email, LinkedIn, calling? Do you do one of it? Do you do all of it? Like, what's your feeling on that?
I think there's not just one way to do it all, right? So I think you try the different channels, because one person might respond to a cold email versus that person might not, but they might respond to a LinkedIn outreach, right? Or they might respond to joining an event like we're doing here, like a LinkedIn Live or a webinar, where then they can interact with you, see you, and then reach out to you via one of your channels. So I wouldn't say that just do one. I would recommend people try different things, because if you have a broad enough audience, eventually, having those different channels of reaching those folks will reach all the people that you want to reach.
I love it. All right. Well, I won't go backwards anymore. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
No, this is great.
Obviously shared out. We'll probably post it up also on the Wolfcast as a episode of the Wolfcast, so people can subscribe and see the video if they weren't able to join us live. Thank you, Juan. I really appreciate your time. We look forward to following the rest of your journey with Elevate.
No, I appreciate it, Michael. Thanks so much.